right, so our next speaker is Kyle Rojas. He is on our enterprise team and leads the institutional efforts for the Americas, and he's going to be talking about the institutional moment for Ethereum. So let's give him a round of applause.
It's crazy. I can DeFi all day, but I can't extend my laptop screen. It's pretty awesome. All right, as she said, my name's Kyle, and I lead institutional efforts across the Americas, North and South America for the Ethereum Foundation. And just some context on my background. Before the EF, I led protocols for half a decade, first early on for the Graph and then for Avail. Before crypto, I worked almost 7 years at Goldman Sachs, and then before that, I was 12 years military, so yeah, I'm old. But, all right, the institutional moment for Ethereum. Some of you might have heard this phrase lately. It shows up in headlines and panels, research reports, conference stages. And here's the problem as I see it. When people say that term, they often mean completely different things, and things, even more importantly, often get lost in translation when speaking to institutions. Some people hear opportunity and validation, others hear capture and compromise. But the institutional moment is real, with companies like BlackRock, JP Morgan, Fidelity, and so many more that we're talking to, with tens of trillions of dollars in assets under management, building real things in Ethereum and the ecosystem. It's pretty amazing. But again, when different groups of people talk about Ethereum's institutional moment, almost no one means the same thing. When we, crypto-native communities, hear institutions are coming, there's often excitement, but especially from the OGs, there's often this underlying concerns about value drift, about TradFi taking control, and about Ethereum losing what's made this ecosystem different, unique, and powerful. But when institutions hear Ethereum, when I'm in the room with them, they're not thinking about ideology at all. That was an amazing drop right there. What they are thinking about is operational risk. They're thinking about legal exposure. They're thinking about failure modes and governance. Same technology, but completely opposite interactions. And before I started spending time with institutional leaders from within the Web3 ecosystem, I expected or even hoped for a certain type of question set. I expected debates on the pros and cons of protocol mechanics, incentives, I'm a big incentives nerd, and market structure, but that's almost never what I hear. They don't ask ideological questions or use ideological terms at all. They ask infrastructure questions. And so here's the core idea of what I want to offer today. We in the crypto space often describe properties, values, and ideals, but institutions by functions and outcomes. We often talk about how a system behaves and why. Institutions evaluate what a system does for them operationally. We say things like decentralized, trustless, and permissionless. Institutions ask, what's the risk? What process does this replace for me right now, and what makes it better than what I'm using? And also, what guarantees does this provide? And so my challenge to all of us, if we really want institutions and the world to adopt this technology, we need to start communicating with normal people in their own languages, while of course maintaining our integrity and ideals. So if we want Ethereum to be understood, not sold, but truly understood, we need institutional translation, not dilution of our message at all, just translation. For instance, when we say trustless, institutions probably hear chaos. Said in a different way, we mean that there is no reliance on a specific counterparty. When we say decentralized, and we do say this very often, institutions might hear a lack of control. And what it actually means operationally is that there's no single operator, no single point of failure, and no single party that can change the rules. When we say permissionless, institutions hear a lack of standards. What it actually means is open access to a globally shared system without gatekeepers, approvals, or counterparties, and that makes sense to institutions. When we say immutable, institutions often hear inflexibility, or even worse, irreversibility without recourse, no one to blame and no way to make things right. And what it actually means in reality is that it's a tamper-evident historical record where changes are transparent and auditable by everyone, at least in most cases. Not that nothing can ever change, but that history cannot be quietly and selectively rewritten behind closed doors, which is literally how TradFi operates today. And then finally, when we say censorship-resistant, institutions often hear something like regulatory risk. What it actually means is transaction processing that can't be arbitrarily blocked, selectively delayed, or discriminated against by a single operator. In other words, predictable access to global execution under a defined set of rules, even, and I'd say especially, when counterparties don't trust each other, which is just the reality of basic human nature when you're transacting globally. Our values in the Web3 space matter, and they won't go away, but our values will literally only travel at scale in the institutional world when they're expressed as functions and outcomes that institutions will understand. And when it comes to what kinds of questions I hear most from institutions, this is probably a good summary, not comprehensive, but it's a good start. They're looking for guarantees. They want to understand how the technology will evolve, and even more importantly, if they can rely on it to survive. They focus heavily on audits to minimize risk, naturally. They want to know what situations and simulations could end in failure, and they almost always think about accountability if something goes wrong. But I want to emphasize something really important that not a lot of people understand, is that these questions are not anti-crypto at all. They are infrastructure maturity questions, which is a good thing. And even more importantly, they're not asking or even caring if something is decentralized. As we put it, they're asking if the system is dependable. But those mean the same things, it's just a translation layer. And this isn't abnormal, it's actually expected, it's how the world works. When a system starts getting stress tested, it means it's being evaluated as real-world infrastructure, not as an experiment. We don't stress test toys, we don't stress test memes or fads. Institutions test systems they want to literally rely on with tens of trillions of dollars. Institutional doubts aren't rejection, it's actually a signal that institutions are taking our industry extremely seriously. And one of the most useful translation tools, I think, is using analogies. That's how institutions think as well. So just helping folks in the institutional realm update their mental models so that when they hear the word Ethereum, they have something tangible and understandable pop up into their minds. So for instance, Ethereum is not a bank, it's a settlement rail. It's not a company platform, it's a shared execution layer. It's not a fintech app, it's programmable escrow on a global scale. Essentially, Ethereum is not a financial institution in and of itself, it is critical financial infrastructure. And it's a massive freaking upgrade from the infrastructure that banks, fintechs, and others rely on today. Crypto's maturing, it's growing up, and I think we need, and our language needs to grow up as well. When I think of the difference between how early and mature ecosystems speak, early ecosystems, again, speak in ideals, values, and vision. Mature ecosystems speak in outcomes. Not in place of our values, those will remain, but instead having our values translated as functions and outcomes. Decentralization becomes resilience. Neutrality becomes governance, stability. Permissionless becomes open integration efficiency. That's what people in the real world understand, and that's how systems cross into real world global usage domains. And this is where we all come in, right? The builders and users. The next wave of Ethereum adoption is not going to be blocked by tech. If there is a tech blocker, we're going to build to overcome it. We're going to build to overcome every single one, which we are. One of the biggest right now is privacy, which the Ethereum ecosystem is working heavily on. But adoption will be blocked and is being blocked in many cases by a failure in our ability to translate and a lack of ability to adapt to the way we explain infrastructure to non-crypto audiences. In essence, we need to be institutionally bilingual if we want them to take us seriously, where we have our values and protocol truth on the one hand, plus operational and real-world framing on the other. And let me be equally clear about something else. Translation does not mean compromise at all. There are hard red lines. Credible neutrality must hold. Open access must remain real. Protocol capture has to be resisted. I'd say translation is not surrender by any means. It's simply understanding and evolving to meet a big part of our target market where they live. I'd also say like the real institutional moment for Ethereum is not ETFs. It's not announcements and press cycles. This is important. It's when neutral, programmable, verifiable infrastructure becomes normal to build on. It's when Ethereum as a public settlement layer stops being strange. It's when shared execution becomes expected, demanded. And I really do think we're closer to that moment than most people realize. I'm seeing this in real time every single day in rooms and on calls with leaders from the biggest brand names in TradFi. It's so freaking cool. And in the end, the Ethereum ecosystem doesn't need institutional approval. We're gonna keep building cool stuff. But institutions will increasingly need, let's call it Ethereum literacy. And the people who will build that literacy layer will help shape the next decade of adoption. And that's our job. That's our shared mission. And I really do feel so damn lucky to be a part of it. And I hope you all do too. Thanks, everyone.